Welcome, dear listener, to our channel. If you find meaning in stories of family, love, and the surprising ways life turns, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe if you haven't already, because each story we share here is a reminder that even in the darkest corners, truth and dignity can shine. I once heard it said that some of the greatest tragedies in life arrive disguised as fairy tales. At first, they sparkle, grand entrances, tender gestures, promises of forever. But if you look closely, sometimes you will notice the edges fray, the seams pull, and the truth waits patiently for its moment to be revealed. For Emily, it began at a gala she had no business attending. She was 24, working 2 part-time jobs, waiting tables during the day, shelving books in the library at night. Her dress was borrowed from a friend, a size too big and pinned at the waist, but she carried herself with a quiet grace that made even the chandelier lights seem to soften in her presence. That evening, the city's wealthiest gathered in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Emily stood near the back, a glass of water in hand, watching a world she never imagined herself part of. And that was when Daniel entered her life. Daniel Hayes was everything she thought she could never reach, an investment banker with a smile polished by privilege, the kind that disarmed and dazzled in equal measure. He noticed Emily almost instantly. Perhaps it was the way she listened more than she spoke, or how she seemed unaffected by the swirl of self-importance around her. "First gala?" he asked, offering her a champagne flute. She laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" "Not at all," he replied, his voice smooth as velvet. "But most people look around this room and see opportunity. You look like you're actually seeing the people." It was the kind of line that might sound rehearsed to others, but to a girl like Emily, whose world had been measured in rent due dates and secondhand shoes, it felt like magic. That night they danced under chandeliers, her borrowed heels clicking against marble floors. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe she was living inside a storybook. A prince had chosen her from the shadows, and the world seemed suddenly brighter. She didn't know then that fairy tales often ask for a price, and that hers would be collected not in glass slippers, but in dignity. After the gala, Daniel pursued her with the kind of intensity only found in movies. He sent roses to her modest apartment, their scent almost out of place against peeling paint and secondhand furniture. He whisked her away to dinners where the silverware had more courses than she had paychecks in a week. Emily laughed at her own awkwardness, and Daniel assured her she was refreshing. But then came the first red flag, though she didn't name it as such. At one dinner with his colleagues, Daniel introduced her lightly, almost dismissively. "This is Emily," he said. "She works at a library, keeps her busy." He didn't mention her love of literature, her knack for remembering stories that soothed children during Saturday readings, or her plans to pursue a teaching degree. He spoke of her as though she were a footnote, not a chapter. The colleagues smiled politely, then returned to their talk of stocks and mergers. Emily sat quietly, sipping water, trying not to notice how invisible she felt. Later, when she found the courage to mention it, Daniel brushed it off with a laugh. "You're too sensitive," he said, kissing her forehead. "Don't worry about what they think. They're boring men anyway." It should have stung more, but Emily, caught in the glow of his attention, told herself it was nothing. Then came another whisper. His mother, Eleanor, had a way of looking at Emily as though through glass, like she was some exhibit at a museum she didn't quite approve of. At brunch one Sunday, Eleanor leaned close and said with a smile too polished to be kind, "You're a sweet girl, Emily. I just hope you understand the kind of family you're marrying into. We have standards." Emily smiled back, even as her hands clenched under the tablecloth. Daniel squeezed her knee, as though to reassure her, but he didn't say a word in her defense. And so Emily convinced herself these were just small hurdles. After all, hadn't fairy tales always placed obstacles in the heroine's path? She believed, perhaps too eagerly, that love was enough to smooth over sharp edges. She didn't know then that those ignored red flags would one day wave like banners in a storm. There is something about parties. They reveal people in ways quiet dinners never can. The masks slip when champagne flows, when music drowns restraint. For Emily, the engagement party was supposed to be a celebration of love. Instead, it became her first glimpse at what marrying Daniel truly meant. The Hayes family estate sparkled that evening. Manicured gardens strung with lights, a grand piano in the foyer, trays of hors d'oeuvres floating from one manicured hand to another. Emily wore a simple cream dress she'd bought secondhand and tailored herself. It wasn't designer, but it fit her body and her spirit, soft, modest, sincere. When Daniel introduced her as his fiancée, applause followed, though the kind that feels more polite than joyful. She smiled, cheeks warm, trying to believe she belonged in that glittering room. But whispers traveled quickly among the polished guests. "Where did he find her?" one woman murmured behind a jeweled hand. "She's pretty, but ordinary." "Just a library girl," another scoffed. Emily caught pieces of their words, each one landing like a pinprick beneath her skin. At the toast, Daniel's sister, Victoria, raised her glass and spoke with a smile that never reached her eyes. "To my brother, who has always had impeccable taste, and to Emily," she paused, letting the silence stretch just enough, "who proves that love truly can come from the most unexpected places." Laughter rippled across the room. It sounded harmless to everyone else, but Emily felt the sting. She knew what Victoria meant. Unexpected in their world was code for unworthy. Daniel laughed along, wrapping his arm around Emily's waist. "She's right," he said. "Emily keeps me grounded. She reminds me of simpler things." Simpler. The word lodged in Emily's throat like a pebble. Was that all she was to him? A reminder of something quaint like a family photo on a dusty shelf? Still, she smiled. She told herself it was only nerves, only her imagination. After all, hadn't Daniel chosen her? Hadn't he looked past all the things she lacked and declared she was enough? But as the night wore on, as the champagne glasses clinked and the polished laughter echoed, Emily felt smaller and smaller, like a guest in her own story. And though she didn't know it then, that night marked the first time she realized fairy tales can sour long before the wedding bells. In the days after the engagement party, Emily learned a new kind of silence. It wasn't the peaceful hush of library aisles or the calm before sleep. It was the silence of swallowing pain whole, of deciding which truths to share and which to bury inside her chest. Every comment from Daniel's family lingered like smoke in her lungs. Unexpected, ordinary, simpler. Words meant to be tossed off casually, yet heavy enough to bend her shoulders when she was alone. She never told Daniel how much they hurt. When he asked why she seemed distracted, she only smiled and said she was tired. When he brushed away her worries with a kiss, she let him, though she felt herself slipping further into the shadows of his world. At night, lying awake, Emily would reach for the memory of her grandmother, the one person who had ever truly seen her. "Never measure yourself by the noise of others," her grandmother once told her. While mending a quilt, "People talk because it's easy, but value, that's quieter. It's proven in how you carry yourself when no one believes in you." Those words returned to Emily now, like a lullaby. And still she doubted, because belief is fragile when the world keeps telling you you're less. She buried herself in the routine she knew, shelving books, reading to children at the library, smiling at neighbors who didn't care about last names or family wealth. For a few hours each day, she was simply Emily, the girl who loved stories. But every evening she returned to Daniel's world, where her dress was never quite right, her words never quite polished, her presence tolerated rather than cherished. She told herself it was only temporary, that once they were married, once she became part of the Hayes family, things would change. Fairy tales, she thought, always had trials before the happy ending. What she didn't see was how those silent struggles were shaping her, not into the bride they wanted, but into the woman who one day would stand against them all. Weddings, people said, were supposed to be the happiest season of a woman's life. But for Emily, every step of planning felt less like joy and more like an exam. She was doomed to fail. The Hayes family took control of the details almost immediately. Eleanor, Daniel's mother, insisted on a ballroom venue, one Emily had only ever seen in glossy magazines. Victoria, his sister, scoffed at Emily's suggestion of a smaller ceremony. "A wedding is a statement," she said flatly, "and you don't want to look provincial." Emily laughed softly as though she agreed, though the word echoed inside her. Provincial. It was another way of saying she wasn't enough. Even her dress became a battleground. Emily dreamed of lace, something delicate, with sleeves like her grandmother's gown, But the Hayes women dismissed it as too quaint. They pushed her towards silk, diamonds, in excess. She stood in mirrors surrounded by fabrics she didn't recognize, watching a stranger appear in white. Friends noticed her unease. At coffee one afternoon, her closest confidant, Laura, leaned across the table. Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "You don't seem happy." "I'm just overwhelmed," Emily answered quickly, forcing a smile. "Big weddings aren't really my thing, but Daniel wants it. His family wants it. I'll adjust." Laura didn't look convinced. Marriage isn't about adjusting to their world. It's about building your own. The words struck Emily in a place she didn't want to examine, so she changed the subject, hiding behind her latte cup. At night, doubts crept in like shadows under a door. She replayed moments. Daniel laughing when she tried to share her opinion. His silence when his family mocked her. The way he treated her kindness as novelty rather than strength. And yet, when Daniel looked at her with those polished smiles, when he promised she was everything he wanted, she let herself believe, because belief is what kept her afloat. Because love, she told herself, was worth sacrifice. But sometimes sacrifice is only the soft word for surrender. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and merciless, the kind of sunshine that makes everything sharper. Every wrinkle, every doubt. Emily stared at her reflection in the hotel mirror, draped in silk that shimmered but felt foreign against her skin. It was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't hers. The bridal suite buzzed with activity. Makeup artists, hairstylists, coordinators, all strangers, all arranged by Eleanor. Emily sat quietly while they pinned her hair into a style that seemed more suited to a magazine cover than to her heart. When she hesitated, Eleanor's voice rang out like a command. "Perfection is expected today. This is not the time for modest choices." Each word felt like a weight on Emily's chest. She wanted to whisper that perfection wasn't her dream. She wanted to say her grandmother's lace dress would have been enough. Instead, she smiled tightly, as if agreement might make the heaviness easier to bear. Downstairs, the ballroom gleamed like a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers, floral arches so tall they nearly touched the ceiling. Guests in tailored suits and couture dresses sipped champagne, while a string quartet played in the corner. Emily caught fragments of conversation as she was ushered past. "Can you believe Daniel is marrying her? She's pretty, but she doesn't look refined. I give it 2 years tops." Each remark landed like a stone. Her fingers trembled around the bouquet, though she held her head high. In the groom's suite, Daniel was laughing with his groomsmen. When Emily peeked in, he winked, raising his glass. "Relax, Em, you're glowing. Just enjoy the moment." She wanted to believe him, to let his confidence drown her doubts. But somewhere deep inside, she heard Laura's words echo. Marriage isn't about adjusting to their world. It's about building your own. Now, standing at the threshold of this glittering cage, Emily wondered if she was walking into a life she had chosen, or one that had been chosen for her. The music swelled, the doors creaked open, and with every step she took down the aisle, the pressure tightened, promising that something was about to break. The aisle stretched before Emily like a long, gleaming runway of judgment. Every eye turned, every whisper sharpened. She walked slowly, bouquet trembling in her hands, while the quartet's music swelled to fill the silence that followed her steps. At first she tried to block out the murmurs, but some words slipped through, clear as broken glass. "Poor thing, doesn't fit in at all. She looks nervous." Not surprising, this is way above her station. She fixed her gaze on Daniel at the altar. His smile was charming, confident, untouched by the weight she carried. She thought if she just focused on him, she could survive. But then came the breaking point. As she reached the front, Daniel's mother leaned toward a row of guests and without even lowering her voice whispered, "Let's hope she doesn't stumble. It would be a shame for a gold digger to trip before she signs the papers." Laughter rippled through the front rows, low but unmistakable. Emily froze, the bouquet nearly slipped from her fingers. Heat rushed to her face, but the sting in her chest was colder than ice. She forced herself to breathe, forced her feet to move, though her body screamed to turn and run. Victoria, Daniel's sister, caught her eye and smirked. Then, as the officiant began to speak, Victoria muttered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, Imagine marrying into millions with nothing but a library card to your name. A few chuckles followed, sharp and cruel. Blue is it, mom? Oh, sharp in a row. Emily's throat tightened. She blinked back tears, her vision blurring. This was supposed to be her moment, her beginning. Instead, it felt like a spectacle stage for her humiliation. Daniel noticed, of course. He leaned close, his whisper brushing against her ear. Don't let them get to you, he murmured. Just smile. They'll learn to accept you. But his tone carried no anger for his family, no defense for her dignity, only an instruction, as if her pain were an inconvenience. So she smiled, or at least tried. The room saw what it wanted, a nervous bride holding back tears of joy. Only Emily knew the truth, that each tear burned with shame. And though the vows were about to begin, deep inside she began to wonder, if this was how her story started, what kind of ending could possibly await her? The ceremony ended with applause that felt hollow, as if everyone had clapped more out of politeness than joy. Emily smiled for the cameras, smiled for Daniel's hand gripping hers, smiled for the guests who looked at her as though she had wandered onto the wrong stage. Each smile cost her a little piece of herself. When the reception began, the ballroom glittered with celebration. Waiters glided with silver trays, crystal glasses chimed, and laughter rose like smoke to the vaulted ceiling. But beneath the music, Emily caught the words that weren't meant for her ears. She'll never measure up to his world. Poor Daniel, blinded by infatuation. Give her a few months and she'll embarrass him. She sat quietly at his head table, fork untouched, her bouquet now wilting on the cloth beside her. Daniel leaned in every so often, whispering, "You look perfect. Just enjoy tonight." His words were sweet, but they carried the same hollowness as the applause. Pretty on the surface, empty underneath. When Victoria stood to give her toast, Emily braced herself. "To my dear brother and his lovely bride," Victoria began, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "Daniel has always known how to make bold choices, and this," she gestured at Emily with her glass, "might be his boldest yet." The room laughed, a warm, cruel ripple. Emily's throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, blinking rapidly, fighting the hot sting in her eyes. She didn't want them to see her break, but tears, stubborn and heavy, slid down her cheek before she could stop them. She excused herself quickly, rising from the table as if to adjust her dress. In truth, she hurried to the powder room, locking herself in a stall. The marble walls echoed her quiet sobs. She pressed her hands against her face, willing herself to breathe, to steady. In that fragile moment, she remembered her grandmother again. Value is proven in how you carry yourself when no one believes in you. Emily wiped her tears. She fixed her makeup. She stepped back into the ballroom, shoulders squared, head high. The guests still whispered, still smirked, but they would not see her broken. Not tonight. What Emily didn't know was that her breaking point had already set something in motion, an arrival that would soon silence the entire hall. The reception hummed with chatter and music, but beneath the glitter and noise, Emily felt the hollow echo of her own heart. She moved through the ballroom like a shadow, smiling at well-wishers, nodding politely at jokes made at her expense, sipping from a champagne glass she never actually drank. Daniel was in his element, laughing with colleagues, shaking hands, boasting about business deals. He looked every bit the golden sonny his family adored. To him, tonight was a victory. To Emily, it was survival. Then, just as the band struck up another waltz, the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened with a slow, deliberate creak. Heads turned. A man in a dark suit stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't belong to the glittering crowd. No tailored tuxedo, no champagne glass in hand. His presence alone drew a hush. The man adjusted his glasses, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Emily. With measured steps, he approached the head table. Every eye followed him. Daniel frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Eleanor leaned toward Victoria, whispering, "Who on earth invited him?" When he reached Emily, the man bowed slightly. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked formally, his voice low but steady. Emily blinked. "Yes." He set the briefcase on the table, clicking it open with precise hands. Inside lay a sealed envelope, its edges worn, but its seal unbroken. My name is Thomas Avery. I represent the estate of your late grandmother, Margaret Collins. This letter is addressed to you to be read on this day, your wedding day. The ballroom fell utterly silent. The quartet trailed off mid-note. Forks hovered in the air. Even Daniel's confident smile faltered. Eleanor's voice cut sharply through the quiet. This is highly inappropriate. Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow. But the lawyer shook his head, calm and resolute. Mrs. Collins's instructions were very clear. The reading must happen today, in the presence of her granddaughter's new family. Emily's breath caught. Her grandmother, her steady, gentle anchor, had left her something? Why today of all days? Thomas Avery broke the wax seal with a deliberate snap. The sound echoed louder than any toast, louder than any whisper. And in that moment, with the lawyer standing tall and the entire Hayes family watching uneasily, Emily sensed the balance of the evening shifting. The shame that had been piled on her shoulders was about to be lifted, not by her own voice, but by her grandmother's hand reaching out from beyond. The air in the ballroom grew taut, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Glasses stopped clinking, conversations died mid-sentence, all eyes fixed on the lawyer as he unfolded the letter. His voice, clear and steady, carried through the hush. To my dearest granddaughter, Emily, he began, if you are hearing these words, it means you are stepping into a new chapter of your life. I cannot be there to hold your hand, but I can leave behind the protection and love that guided me while I lived. Emily's throat tightened. She gripped the edge of the table, her heart beating loud enough to drown the silence around her. The lawyer continued, it has always been my wish that you never measure yourself by wealth or by the shallow approval of others. Yet I also knew this world can be cruel, and sometimes love blinds us to cruelty until it is too late. For this reason, I left behind something that cannot be taken from you. My life's work, the Collins Hotel Group, now fully yours. The room gasped, gasps that turned into stunned murmurs. A few glasses slipped from hands and shattered on the marble floor. Hotels, someone whispered. The Collins Empire, that's hers. Emily's hands trembled, her mind struggling to keep pace with the words. She remembered summers spent in her grandmother's modest home, the lace curtains, the quiet garden. Not once had her grandmother hinted at owning a chain of hotels known across the country. But Thomas Avery wasn't finished. Along with the hotel group comes a trust, valued in the tens of millions, to ensure that you, Emily, will never be at the mercy of those who cannot see your worth. These assets belong to you alone and are not to be controlled by any spouse, relative, or third party. This was my promise to your mother, and now it is my gift to you. Silence. Utter ringing silence. Eleanor's face drained of color, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Victoria's jaw hung open, words failing her for once. And Daniel stared at Emily with an expression she had never seen before. Not love, not pride, but hunger. The lawyer folded the letter and returned it to the envelope with deliberate care. Mrs. Hayes, he said formally, today you inherit not only the Collins Hotel Group, but also your grandmother's full legacy. Congratulations. Every eye turned to Emily, the girl they had mocked as a gold digger, the outsider, the library girl with nothing. She sat frozen, heart pounding, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. Value is quieter, but it lasts. For the first time that night, Emily felt the weight of the humiliation shift, and in its place a new weight settled. Power. The lawyer's final words still hung in the air when the ballroom erupted. The silence that had frozen every guest cracked into a storm of voices. Did he say millions? She owns Collins Hotels? My God, I stayed in one last summer. The orchestra faltered, instruments dropping mid-song as the musicians turned to gawk. Waiters paused mid-step, trays trembling in their hands. Even the chandeliers seemed to glimmer differently, as if the very room was aware its balance had shifted. At the head table, the Hayes family sat in stunned tableau. Eleanor's polished composure cracked into sharp edges. Her lips thinned, her eyes darting between Emily and the lawyer, as though she might snatch back the words from the air. Victoria whispered furiously to her mother, her hand trembling so badly her champagne spilled across the tablecloth. The Golden Hayes name, so carefully guarded, so proudly flaunted, suddenly seemed pale beside Collins. And Daniel's smile was gone. He stared at Emily as though seeing her for the first time. Not as the girl he had plucked from obscurity, not as the fiancée he could shape and control, but as a woman holding a fortune far beyond his reach. His jaw worked, as if forming words that refused to come. Emily, for her part, sat utterly still. She wasn't smiling, wasn't gloating. Inside, her pulse thundered, but on the surface she carried the quiet dignity her grandmother had always modeled. She looked out at the sea of faces that only an hour ago had smirked, mocked, and whispered. Now those same faces carried something new. Envy, and awe, even fear. From the back of the room, a guest muttered, not quietly enough, "She's richer than the Hayes family themselves." That sentence landed like a bell toll, its echo undeniable. Emily's fingers tightened on her bouquet. For the first time all evening, she wasn't shrinking beneath their gaze. She was the center, yes, but no longer the spectacle of ridicule. She was the revelation, the one thing none of them had seen coming. And as the murmurs spread, as the shock rippled outward, Emily realized something important. Their laughter had ended. The humiliation was over, but the reckoning was only beginning. The ballroom's buzz swirled like a hive shaken open. Guests craned their necks, whispering in clusters, replaying the lawyer's words as though repeating them might make sense of the impossible. Emily felt the weight of Daniel's eyes before she turned to meet them. He was smiling again, but it wasn't the boyish, effortless smile that had charmed her at the gala. This one was strained, too wide, and it didn't reach his eyes. He reached for her hand, clasping it with a grip that bordered on possessive. "Emily," he said softly, though the microphone caught enough of his voice to ripple through the speakers. "This changes everything. You should have told me." His tone carried no warmth. It was not the voice of a man thrilled for his bride's good fortune. It was the voice of a man recalculating, as if their entire relationship had been an equation, and he had just discovered the sum far larger than expected. Emily pulled her hand back gently, but Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Do you understand what this means for us? For me? Together we could be unstoppable." There it was, that hunger in his eyes. Not love, not partnership, but ambition thinly veiled as devotion. Eleanor, regaining some composure, chimed in sharply, "Yes, Emily, this is wonderful news for the family. Collins Hotels alongside the Hayes legacy, a perfect merger." A merger. The word stung. She wasn't a bride to them now, she was a transaction. Daniel straightened, addressing the room with a confidence that seemed suddenly desperate. "My wife and I are honored to carry on the Collins legacy. This union is not only about love, it is about two great families coming together." The crowd applauded hesitantly, but Emily's stomach twisted. "Love," he had said, though his hands still squeezed hers like a claim, not a comfort. Emily's heart ached at the memory of the man who had once charmed her with simple words under chandelier light. That man, she now realized, had been a mask. This Daniel, the one whose smile glimmered greed, whose eyes measured her worth in dollars, this was the truth she had ignored all along. And as the applause faded, she knew the fairy tale was gone. What stood in its place was a game of power, and Daniel Hayes was about to learn he had chosen the wrong opponent. Applause faded into an uneasy hush. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Emily and Daniel, waiting to see how the bride would respond. Emily rose slowly from her chair. Her silk gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. But for the first time all evening, she wasn't thinking about appearances. She wasn't thinking about fitting in or keeping peace. She was thinking of her grandmother's words. Never measure yourself by the noise of others. She turned to face the crowd, her voice calm but carrying in the silence. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her fingers no longer trembling around her bouquet. "I know some of you came expecting to witness a union of families, of wealth, of status. But I need to tell you something." Daniel reached for her arm, whispering urgently, "Emily, sit down. Don't do this." She pulled free gently but firmly, her eyes never leaving the audience. This marriage was supposed to be about love, about partnership. Yet tonight I've been reminded over and over again that in some eyes I am only as valuable as the fortune you thought I lacked, and now as valuable as the fortune you think I hold. Murmurs rippled through the hall, Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. I want you all to know I am not marrying into the Hayes family to be tolerated, pitied, or treated as a convenient investment. My grandmother's gift was not meant to be another prize for this family to claim. It was meant to protect me from exactly this moment. Emily's voice grew steadier, stronger. Daniel's face flushed red. Emily, stop this, he hissed. You're embarrassing yourself. She turned to him then, her eyes sharp, her voice cutting through the room like crystal breaking. No, Daniel. The only embarrassment here is mistaking control for love. The only shame is believing you could diminish me and still expect my devotion. The crowd gasped. Someone clapped quietly, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate. Emily lifted her chin, shoulders squared, dignity radiating through every word. I will not be spoken for. I will not be laughed at. And I will not marry into a family that sees me as less, even now. This is not my fairy tale. This is my stand. She set the bouquet down on the table, a deliberate act of release. For the first time all evening, she felt lighter. And in that moment, the bride who had walked the aisle in silent shame now stood as a woman unafraid, reclaiming her story before the very people who tried to strip it from her. For a long moment, the ballroom hung in silence, as though no one dared exhale. Emily stood with her bouquet left behind on the table, her shoulders squared, her voice still echoing in the vast space. Then she did what no one expected. She turned to the officiant, who stood frozen, papers trembling in his hand. I'm sorry, Emily said softly, but her words carried with conviction. There will be no vows today. This wedding is over. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Glasses clinked as guests turned to one another in disbelief. Some mouths hung open. Others smiled faintly, as if they had just witnessed justice bloom in real time. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing her hand. Emily, don't be ridiculous. You can't just walk away. Think about what this means for us, for appearances. She pulled her hand free with quiet strength. I have thought about it, and I would rather walk alone with dignity than stand beside someone who only sees me as a transaction. Eleanor rose from her chair, fury sparking through her voice. You ungrateful girl! Do you realize the shame you're bringing to this family? Emily turned to her calmly, her eyes steady. No, Mrs. Hayes, the shame doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those who mocked me, belittled me, and underestimated me. Tonight, I carry my grandmother's legacy, not your approval. The words landed like a gavel. Guests began to murmur, some shaking their heads at the Hayes family, others nodding in admiration at Emily's courage. Victoria tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. She'll regret this. She's just overwhelmed. It's nerves. But no one seemed to believe her anymore. The tide had turned. Emily walked toward the center of the ballroom, lifting her chin so every guest could see her clearly. This was supposed to be a day of joy. Instead, it became a lesson. To anyone here who has ever been made to feel small, I want you to know your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. Tonight, I reclaim mine. Applause began, tentative at first, then building until the room erupted. Not for Daniel, not for the Hayes name, but for Emily. Daniel stood pale and stiff beside his mother and sister, the family who had once reveled in their power. Now they were the ones exposed, their arrogance laid bare under the glittering chandeliers. And as the applause thundered, Emily realized her grandmother's gift wasn't just wealth. It was the chance to rise above the cruelty, to turn humiliation into victory, before everyone who had once delighted in her shame. When the applause finally ebbed, Emily walked out of the ballroom with a calmness she hadn't felt in months. The silk gown trailed behind her like a shedding skin, each step carrying her further from the weight of humiliation and closer to something new, something hers. In the quiet of the hallway, Thomas Avery caught up to her, briefcase in hand. His voice was gentle, practical. Miss Collins, he said, using her grandmother's name. There are papers to sign, details to arrange, but I thought you should know. Your grandmother left more than assets. She left instructions. Emily paused. Instructions? He nodded. She wanted you to continue her vision. The hotels were never about luxury alone. They were about creating places where people felt seen, cared for. That legacy is yours now. Emily let out a long breath, almost a laugh. I spent tonight being told I wasn't enough. And now you're telling me I have to run an empire? Thomas's eyes softened. She didn't doubt you, not for a moment. The words wrapped around Emily like her grandmother's in arms might have. Steady, unwavering, kind. For the first time, she didn't feel the sting of the Hayes family's cruelty. She felt the strength of her own name. In the weeks that followed, Emily made choices that startled the society pages. Instead of honeymoon photos with Daniel, headlines read, "Runaway Bride Inherits Collins Hotels and Takes Control." She sat in boardrooms where men twice her age tried to test her resolve, and she answered with clarity that silenced them. But more than that, she carried her grandmother's vision into practice. She visited the hotels, spoke with staff, listened to their stories. She set up scholarships for employees' children, funded literacy programs in the very libraries where she had once worked. Each act was a quiet rebellion against the voices that once mocked her. Each step was proof that she was not merely a woman of fortune, but a woman of value. Emily had walked away from a wedding meant to define her by another family's name. Now she was building her own. And this was her beginning. Months passed, and the whispers that once mocked Emily had turned into stories told with awe. Society's tongues, so quick to laugh, now spun her name with respect. The girl who walked away from the Hayes wedding, the heiress who chose dignity over status, the granddaughter who carried her family's legacy forward. But Emily didn't measure her days by headlines. She measured them by moments of quiet triumph. A hotel housekeeper hugging her because she finally received a scholarship for her son. A young librarian thanking her for funding new books. An elderly guest whispering, "Your grandmother would be proud." Those were the true victories. Daniel tried to reach out once, calling late at night, his voice thick with regret and calculation. "Emily, we could still fix this. Think of what we could build together." She listened only long enough to understand, then hung up. His world was still built on appearances, on the hunger for more. Hers was built on something quieter, stronger. One evening, standing on the balcony of the Collins Hotel her grandmother had opened decades earlier, Emily watched the city lights glow. She thought back to that night at the gala, when she had felt like an outsider. She thought of the aisle she had walked down in silence, the laughter that had nearly broken her, the letter that had saved her. And then she thought of her grandmother's words, "Value is quieter, but it lasts." The true revenge was not in humiliating the Hayes family, though they had been humiliated. It was not in proving her worth with millions, though the millions were hers. The true revenge was in knowing, deep in her heart, that she had never needed their approval to begin with, that she was enough all along. Emily smiled at the night sky, a quiet smile filled with peace. Her grandmother had left her wealth. Life had left her scars, and she had turned them both into strength. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. And so ends today's story, The Wedding Revenge. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel. We share new tales every day about love, betrayal, dignity, and the surprising ways life turns. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.